Okay, so when you printed out your notes, you probably had 13.1 first in your notes, and we're going to do that at the end. So hopefully you figured that out. We're going to talk about two things: a parabola, which we've already talked about, but we've only talked about part of parabolas, and we're going to talk about circles. Circles are kind of fun. So we've already talked about a parabola. You've already seen the graph of a parabola in the form y equals, or f of x equals ax minus h quantity squared plus k. So remember that that was a parabola that either opened up, and we're not getting very exact, don't worry about graphing them exactly, or it opened down. So those parabolas were functions. They both passed the vertical line test. Okay, but now we're going to take and we are going to look at parabolas of this form. Now look at this form. Basically what has happened is things have been switched around a little bit. Look, the x and the y have been flipped around. X and the y. And then here, though, actually, this is wrong. As I look at it, holy smokes, I'm glad I looked at this. We need to rewrite this. This is actually x is equal to a, and it should be y minus k quantity squared plus h. Because not only does the x and the y flip places, but your y and your k should, or your k and your h should also flip places. So please check that and change that. Okay, so what's going to happen is these are parabolas that are going to open either right or left. And these parabolas are not functions. They fail the vertical line test. So you don't really use these a lot in story problems, but we're going to look at them anyway. So here we go. So we're going to first start off with working with a parabola that's in that form. So look, now remember, this is your A, this is your K, and this is your H. Your vertex is still H comma K. It's just that don't forget your K and your H have flipped places. So your vertex for this parabola is 1, 3. So be careful of that. So 1, 3. So there's my vertex. Now, because it starts with an X like this, we know it turns either left or right. Guess what? Because this is a negative, it means it's going to turn to the left. Okay, so now what I would do for here, you're not going to find x-intercepts, but we are going to plug in a couple of points. So we're going to plug in x's and y's, but we're not going to plug in x's here. We're going to plug in y's to help us find our x's. So for example, I'm going to plug in 0 for y. If I plug 0 in for y, 0 minus 3 is negative 3, squared is 9, times negative 2 is negative 18, plus 1 is negative 17. So that means it crosses the x-axis at negative 17, 0. Well, I can't really graph that. It's going to be way out here. But that makes sense because we know that it turns to the left. Let's go ahead and let's plug in a 2 for y. If I plug in a 2 for y, 2 minus 3 is negative 1, squared is 1, times negative 2 is negative 2, and negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1. That one's going to be a little bit better to graph. So negative 1, 2 is going to be a point. Now, there's a line, it's called the axis of symmetry, that goes right down the middle of a parabola. And since we know it turns to the left, we know that it's going to be a line that looks like this. And we know that a parabola is symmetric with respect to this line. This line is like the mirror image. So if there's a point here, there's also going to be a point right there. Let's plug in -2 and see what happens. If I plug in -2, or no, let me try that again. If I plug in, I plugged in 2. If I plug in, let's see, 1 here. 1 for y. 1 minus 3 is -2. Squared is 4. Times -2 is -8. Plus 1 is -7. So -7, 1 is on this parabola. So again, if we kind of look at this axis of symmetry, we know there's going to be a matching point over there. And do you see you have a nice visual of what that parabola looks like? So plug some points in for y. Plug points in, remember you're plugging in y. So like we know that here y is 3, so that's why I plugged in y is 2 and y is 1. So I plugged in y's that made sense. All right, let's look at this one. Notice this one's going to ask for that axis of symmetry, so I'm going to show you how to find it when we do this example. Now look at what this example looks like right here, and they want us to find the vertex and the axis of symmetry. You have to put it in the form x is equal to a y minus k quantity squared plus h to be able to do that. So we're going to do that whole completing the square thing that we did in the last section. So again, if you want to just watch me do this one and then rewind back and do it with me, maybe not a bad idea. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 13 and I'm going to move it over. Remember, oops, this should be a y. Remember how we did that before? Because that's not part of the incomplete square. If I'm going to complete the square, remember this has got to be a 1, so I'm going to factor a 3 out of my first 2 terms only. So y squared plus 4y. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to complete my square here. Half of 4 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So I'm going to add 4, but remember the tricky part? It looks like I added 4 here, but what I really did to the whole right-hand side of the equation is I added 3 times 4, or 12. So how do I undo adding 12? I go to the end and I subtract 12. You do the opposite. And that's, again, because we're only working on one side of my equation. So when I go ahead and clean this all up, I'm going to get 3 y plus 2 quantity squared plus 1. And here is my form. My vertex is h, comma k. My h is 1. My k, remember inside it's the opposite, is -2. This one is not going to turn to the left because this 3 is a positive. It's going to turn to the right. So if I go 1, -2, so there's my vertex. And let's go ahead. Remember, we're going to plug in a y. Well, does it make sense to you that the y I'm going to plug in is going to be -1 because that y is close to the y that is the y of the vertex? So I'm going to plug in -1 for y. If I plug in -1, what's -1 plus 2? Well, that's going to be 1. Squared is 1 times 3 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, -1. Now, remember this is the vertex. We know it turns to the right. This line right here is my axis of symmetry. It is the line that chops the parabola in half. So we know this parabola is going to look like this. So we know that this point up here has a matching point down there on the other side of that mirror, the axis of symmetry. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to graph it now. That axis of symmetry, look at it. It's a line. It's a horizontal line. So remember, for the axis of symmetry, a horizontal line is a y is equal to. Vertical line is an x is equal to. So for the horizontal line, it's y equals, and what is y equal to? Where does it cross the y-axis? It's y equals -2. Now, how can I get that from just looking at the equation? Go to your set of parentheses here. It's always the correct letter. It's y, and then it's going to be -2. This, of course, if it was y minus 2, the axis of symmetry would be y equals 2. If you go and look up into the previous one we did, remember we talked about a little bit about that axis of symmetry. Do you see where that is y equals 3? And look at the equation, y equals 3. All right, let's do this last one here. So find the vertex and the axis of symmetry of the parabola. So this one, notice the y is first. So this is going to be a parabola that opens either up or down. So let's put it into this form. So we're going to take, and we're first going to move over the 12. Now I have to complete my square, but I have to factor out a -1 first. So that's going to give me x squared plus 4x. You should be getting good at this now. If I complete my square here, half of 4 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. But I didn't really add 4. Remember, I added -1 times 4. I added -4. So to counteract that, I have to add +4. So when I clean it up, I'm going to get -1, x plus 2 quantity squared, yikes, plus 16. So what is my vertex? Now, my vertex, because it's a y equals, is hk, and they're in the correct order, so it'd be -2, +16. What's my axis of symmetry? Go right into here. Now, for a parabola that opens either up or down, my axis is going to be a vertical line, so its x is equal to -2. All right, so here we go. Let's go ahead and let's graph what we have. So -2, yikes, 16. Let's, you know what, we're going to have to go by 2's here. So -2 would just be 1 to the left, and then 16 would be up 8. So we're going by 2's. So x equals -2 is that axis of symmetry. It's right down there. It goes down the middle of the parabola, and we know this parabola turns down. So why don't we just go ahead and put 0 in here. If I put a 0 in here for x, 0 plus 2 is 4. Nope, let me try that again. 0 plus 2 is 2, squared is 4, times -1 is -4, plus 16 is 12. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 is on this parabola. And then here's my mirror. So I'm just going to go right to the other side and put that same point, and I'm going to graph my parabola. Now remember, that looks fairly skinny only because we had to go by 2's on this graph. All right, so this is part 1. I'm going to do a part 2 of the video for our circles.